So we have a little stops. You know what we're doing. There you are.
Hi. Okay, that like shifted me over so I see myself, but I don't get to see you guys. But I can kind of see you on the side. Sorry, this is all new for me, so hopefully I don't mess this up. And I have a cat, probably walking through another camera here in a minute, and a dog, and they're very social. So hopefully they don't disrupt us. But thank you all for joining me here today in this way. I'm thrilled to speak to you about negative capability. I wanted to talk a little bit about this concept of negative capability and kind of sort of my journey into it and through it into poems. And then I wanted to read some of my poems that were inspired by kind of embracing the theory. So I'll start. I have a little bit of like a page and a half that I typed up so that to kind of keep me on track, because I wasn't sure about the presentation, whether or not I would feel like how connected I would feel, and I was worried that I would start babbling. So I'm gonna read what I have, and then hopefully from there I'll shift to the poems, and then I'm leaving time at the end to actually answer questions via chat or video, however it works for everyone. So today I'd like to talk about using Keats' theory of negative capability as a tool for moving into poetry writing. Well, all creative writing, really. Then I'd like to share some of my poems which started as a result of purposely embracing negative capability, and hope there will be ample time for questions at the end. I first heard the term negative capability in a prosody course during grad school. I was deeply insecure about my place at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, where many of my classmates had attended the best private schools and had top-notch educations from kindergarten to college. I had only ever attended public schools, and at times it was abundantly clear to me that I lacked exposure to languages and the classics simply because they were not offered in my high school or college. I felt the gaping holes which I worried would finally catch up with me in grad school, and I would be swallowed in some humiliating way before my professors and classmates. I continued to work to fill the holes by reading a great deal, reading deeply, and learning as much as I possibly could. In my prosody course, while I struggled to understand the benefits of various forms of poetry, memorizing passages from Chaucer's work, as well as countless Shakespeare sonnets, we worked our way to Keats and the theory he posited to a relative in a letter in 1817, that a great thinker is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. And that with a great poet, the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration, or rather obliterates all consideration. The two primary thoughts pushed immediately into my mind as the professor explained Keats' meaning. Wow, I thought, being in uncertainty can be beneficial to the creative act. If one simply sits in not knowing, then one can enter a place of openness and great potential where the world might just show the seeker truths that aren't necessarily visible to observers who believe they have the answers, or observers who believe there's only one steady path to the truth. And secondly, beauty is of greater importance than logic. Seeing beauty is the ultimate goal, since perhaps the most beautiful experience we have is with the mysterious. Almost immediately, I began to write poetry that accepted at a basic level a willingness to not have the answers. A poetry that arrived at a question rather than reasonable deduction of fact. I began to understand that my pursuit was question and curiosity rather than answer and factual certainty. In essence, I became a seeker of truth that emanated from direct investigation with places of confusion and dismay. I think this is why I write so much about death, staring deeply into the physical fact of it, because this is all that I can really access. I think this is why I write so much about my childhood, because I only remember flashes and incomplete stories from a rather difficult passage. My understanding of Keats' theory helped me at 23 years old to start writing with less fear because I could see beauty. I was learning to sit with all of my senses engaged and let the poem come. My shortcomings, while still troublesome to me, were not an impediment to writing. Eventually, I found my way to other texts that would support Keats' theory, such as Richard Hugo's suggestion in The Triggering Town to write off the subject. Hugo recommended that the poet begin the poem not with sense or logic, but rather with sound and image, to begin writing with the ear and not at all worry about making logical sense. He recommended writing nonsense and continue to change the subject until one lands on a subject that won't be changed or let go of our attention. For many of us, writing becomes a struggle to find voice or figure out a new way to get into the poem. But perhaps we are all just writing the poem that needs to be written because we write what we live or what gives our lives meaning. I found my pursuit of beauty, that is the natural world, that pushed me into my awareness and asked to be written, because I accepted mystery and uncertainty. I could move more easily into accepting what was presented to me. I could be less self-conscious in the presence of the natural world. So so that's some of my my journey into through negative capability. For me, it wasn't really a concept that I thought about it, but once I understood it based on the way that my professor explained it, and through my own reading beyond that and kind of an exploration of it, once I understood it, I just kind of digested it, and it became a part of my process in going towards poetry. And again, it did really free me up to be able to write in ways that I wouldn't have written it, because I thought I needed to have all the answers when I first started writing. So I thought this would be interesting to talk about this idea, this theory, because I think very often we think that the poet has to have a certain amount of answer or understanding, but there's something about the process of going into the poem, coming from a place of not knowing and having the not knowing be an aspect of the generation of the work. So if the poem begins in a place of question, that's one way to start a poem, is the unknown. But another way to start it is to question the certainty, to start where you think you do fully understand something. You are certain, you believe you have the right answer or all of the answer, and you know the truth. And to take that and present that as a possibility of something that could be dismantled or broken down or explored in a different way, because how we part of it is the path into which we enter the poem, that if we are in a space with it where we would believe that there's only one path to follow into the truth or into the experience, we end up not necessarily always finding the best path, because we assume we already know what that path is supposed to be. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to share some of the poems that and what I decided is I just didn't feel like reading my first book or even my second book. So I'm just gonna read from the third book, where I get deeply into a couple different things. And then I wanted to read some new poems from a book that I'm working on this year, and I hope to finish this summer. What happened for me with this is the book. It's all backwards, but at least it is on my screen. This is Red Channel in the Rupture. And for this manuscript, I decided I wanted to fully investigate the experiences that are that happen when we allow and we consider for a moment the way in which the past interferes with or engages with our present. Like how, where's that point where that collision happens for us in the generation of how we understand our experiences. So for me, the question was really like, well, how much of what is happening for me now is because of something that happened before? So it sort of like began with this place of just not knowing, not understanding, or wanting to better understand the relationship between the past and the present, and sort of like looking for that point at which they meet. So I think I'm going to start with a poem that's a little bit difficult, and I'm sorry about that, but it's called The Moon That Night. And the reason why I wanted to start with this is because it was the first one I wrote in this series, and it taught me what I needed to write for this book. Okay, the moon that night. Having eaten your head clean off, my cat drops your plump carcass on the doormat. Between blood and purple clots, a bit of neck bone insists on the air. I lean toward the sharpness, get right up to the vacant white nipple, like milk that has contested its cream and been deemed fat-free. Like transparent like a baby's fingernail, the broken column spills dead nerves. My cat licks her paw, and smack, your pudgy mass jumps, blood escaping into jute threads. White, like the full moon that night I was 12 and we snuck up the road. He opened his blue jeans and thrust his blunt eye at me. It was this or nothing, he said. I wished I'd chosen nothing. Later, the moon split the road with redwoods and I relented to my home. Exhausted, I didn't swing my arms at the bat-stealing moths above my head. I didn't wake again until you, little mouse, resting in the middle of welcome, until my cat, in whose wide green eyes I see myself leaning from the doorway, and I remember. For me, the poem was a bit clunky, but it taught me that there was the possibility of seeing that point at which the past intrudes on the present, and kind of, it was like clunky because it was an effort at this moment to understand what that passage was. I consider it like an aperture, a camera aperture in this book, where the aperture opens to take the photograph, and it's this instant where it opens and it snaps the picture. And just in that moment of opening, it's like a channel. And right in that channel is the point at which the past and the present connect and meet. So I kept seeking that in writing this book, seeking to understand what that aperture was and what the possibilities were for the aperture. And I don't know that I'm satisfied with it, because what I experienced in writing this book and seeking this particular mystery, if you will, was that all I could do was continue to stare into the aperture and sort of look at like, well, what was I allowing to infect the present when I opened that aperture to the past. And it just seemed like I wasn't necessarily going to resolve it in this particular book. Like I would have had to, I think I need to write a few more books, and I think I need to write essay to really understand like that place of movement between time in those times. It's fascinating to me, the way in which how we live our lives and what we become and how we perceive time. Okay, so I'll read some more poems. And Self-Portrait with Teeth. And here is the mystery. Again, here's a different kind of mystery. In a wood near Pongo Lake, I untangle juvenile canines from hair and bone and old scat, putting their orphan circle on my palm. My feral dead returned by a red wolf, and I won't leave them again. A fox maybe, his baby teeth gnashed enamel fins. I'll ask a naturalist for the story when I find the visitor's center. Right now, the fox is bits and bob, remnants in my palm, and I don't know which tale I've wandered in. A poor trade for magic beans. I have no axe. All around me, water lips in the cottonwoods. Long stem mushrooms use a down cypress to get above the marsh. Trumpeter swans in the first weeks of a winter revival, quartet over my head. Yet here is gnawing and hunger enough. I'll trade you your brown cow for these teeth. Jung said the gold is in the shit. Here is why I am alone, channeling a grave, no longer rank or wretched, but arranged on my palm, my shovel in burlap left at home, but I know what's going down. So, time here, sorry. Okay, so I want to make sure I leave time to read some of the newer poems because I've been just so focused on that work, writing more environmental, in bringing those questions, that mystery, that exploration and question to how we treat the environment and what our relationship is to the natural world. So let me just kind of go through here and I'll read a couple more from this book. This is Lizard and Moth. And I was walking with a friend and I saw the most incredible thing right there on a long leaf pine, I guess it is. This lizard had this huge black moth. It had just snatched it from along the trunk and they were fighting. The moth was as big as the lizard and they were fighting. And so I wrote this poem, you know, trying to understand, you know, like this battle that I was seeing, this transformation. It looked like a sort of metamorphosis to me. He breathed black moth wings and they fought, head in the throat, neck skin ballooned, stealing along the bark of a long leaf pine. The fire fluttered and beat hard to leave the breast. The flame was velvet and grew with night things pulled into deep furrows, scraggy plates, making flight a crawler again. Yellow striped tail curling on the bark as the front legs lifted, moments when neither lizard nor moth won. Reappeared as a roaring bullet in the leaves, shadow skipping a rock, coiling in a dream. The lizard dragged the moth to his scaly domain. A dragon's bouquet in circumference drank night from the muse's red mouth, was singing. So, and I'll just read, let's see. I'll read two more, and for some reason I've been inclined to read these poems. I lost my chocolate lab just over a year ago, and so every now and then, recently when I've been reading since she passed, I like to read one of her poems. So this is Atlantic. My dog chases a sandpiper toward the surf, chasing until the bird flies off, both of them snagged by a wave's foamy edge. A crescent washes my boot, new moons everywhere I turn, growling and purring, sand releases the wave and tigers retreat. My dog looks at me, looks where the sandpiper flew, brow furrowed and ears up. Is this joy? The next wave drags her jowls. I see her kind of joy. It is fast, startled, and smells seaworthy this morning. I cannot see my joy. She runs south along the waves, dragging with her the great leash until it is tearing and I call her name. The game races back to me. She tumbles into my legs, catching me with cold, sandy kiss, soaking my arms. I say, good girl, good girl. This measure is all and everything. Okay, and I'll read Blackberries. So I hope you can hear that part of what I'm writing in here is this effort to, like, while the past or while other places and other sort of thinking does intrude and does keep insisting on attention, it is this attempt in these poems to really write being in the moment and really creating like a sense of home and a sense of place. And so this also falls into that same family of poems in this collection. This is Blackberries. The blackberries I eat this morning have in their flavor road dust, pollen, and sunlight gathered and spoke about, sweet and earthen. The skin isn't much to break, a fat, warm jewel pressed to my palate and juiced. I hold each berry at eye level, drupelets wicked in fine hairs. Aggregate seeds multiply in my teeth, my stained fingers pointing out blue magna, heart inside some living, porous and lit. I eat sunlight's purplish black answer to hunger, light crushing around my tongue. The night I hid down in me found to be golden after all, a pollinator's domain. When I aim my hand back through memory and thorns and yellow jackets for the blackest berries. The bucket I carried beside my best friend spilling when we left the road. A momentary coil knots these places. The berries' constellation bursting in its brief transit through ripeness. I eat the entire carton before I leave the farmer's market. The road the berries grew beside consumed too. And now I live here, a peace I've been trying to find all my life. Okay, so I'll read some of the newest poems. And I guess my journey here is to shift as much of the focus outside myself as possible. So this is deep, a practice, and I'll start with this because I think I have to start with the inward before I can sort of move outward. But my questions are about the planet and about our relationship with it now. Deep. I'm writing to you from a place I love. I hiked in at 4 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. I made sure to bring enough water. I'm learning to read my compass. The cactus have yellow flowers, which makes me think of lemons, which makes me thirsty. Can a place be broken? I've been considering a hypothesis concerning the Pacific Ocean, possibly the site of a massive crater where a meteor hit at the Earth's beginning, a cataclysmic event gorging out a part of the planet so large it was forced into orbit, giving us the moon. What moonlight illuminates in the desert is crescent, dark slivers smiling around rocks, and in runnels made from floodwater, shadow snakes, suggesting too a topography of the human gut. I can follow neither arrangements as I write to you this morning. I am sitting on a rock in an arroyo. I've unzipped my jeans to let the air on my skin. In the Pacific, at a level known as Challenger Deep, are species we can't know. You can't even dive that deep or go simmering into a place where you hope you have enough breath or hope you can stay down long enough until the shattering settles into a song. You probably don't need me to tell you how a wound heals. I'm writing to you, I'm writing to say, It is not too late for either of us to be happy. I'm changing these and they're newer, so every now and then I slip up. But this is Butterfly Garden, and it's the butterfly garden in New Orleans. Everywhere I go, I write. I try to visit, you know, tourist places and just kind of really be out in the world. And so as I go, I'm thinking about how we relate to these places, nature, you know, in these sort of controlled places. A butterfly garden. Learning to exit under threat. Blue morpho migrate toward the plexiglass on Canal Street. Escape evaded again by a seduction of plastic morning glory and bird of paradise, tasting reductions of oil and dye. Do not feed the butterflies. The sanctuary damages dusting, so wings are scalloped in their gaze. In the tropics above, a koi pond, arrested sapphire fascinates the room. Legs knead an opaque stamen. Before extinctions, the disappearances are known as relaxing. Numbers portend erasure. As we wait in the passage, the automatic warning, check yourself for butterflies, repeats. Her blouse of embroidered butterflies ignites laughter. A seamstress for the planet, recovering the dying on the threshold of death, images prized for likeness. We walk through the gift store to leave, blue morpho pinned to satin in a black box for $39.99, arched wing cattle heart, great egg fly, the garden windows sweat gold and green. Okay, so some of these I'm still trying to understand them in terms of like how they're working with the context of this manuscript that I'm working on. One of the things I was focusing on with this poem, Yellowgrass Ascent, was putting the poet outside the point of view of the poem, and so that the focus was outside the poet. So this is Yellowgrass Ascent. Soon the black dog with tan markings will race over the rise, bound through blades toward its name, be at your heels smelling ravished, blood ravishing. A hollow tears 1, 2 distances. The farmer aims a shotgun in the yellow grass, spikelets, clusters cluck against his jeans and drowned quiet in the blast. Panorama of a road bordered by redwoods and a farmhouse with green shutters. We don't think of the farmer as beautiful sinew, massaging his calluses after a bath, but he is growing grief inside muscle. Inside teeth, a place for the dog bounding through yellow grass before you give up and stop calling. Inside the sheep, grasses. Inside the dog, blood of grasses. He crosses the field, gun pointed, crickets rebound, face hid by brimmed shadow, neither white or black as it should be. Grass almost to his waist. He leaves a seam going toward the injured sheep and the dead dog with more killing to do. And then with these poems, I found that when I was shifting the focus back to the poet, it was deeply personal, but my ultimate goal was to investigate the nature or the environment or our relationship to it. So this is As Sweet as You Are, and it's a far step back in time, and it's a haibun. In college, I had a favorite corner on the 3rd floor of the library where I brought poetry books, 3 at a time from the shelves. I'd snag a table by a window where I could look up from the page and stare at redwoods just outside. One day, I was burning, a mighty engine in the wet dark, all the delicious wearings of summer by a lake. I was reading Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day by Nikki Giovanni, thinking a poem is like the county fair, tugging the sweet cloud from a paper stick until it dissolves on your tongue and melts inside you. I wasn't convinced of her metaphor, the restlessness indicative of creativity. I was learning to use my body to be a turn in someone's arm, a stopgap to loneliness. Bread is life, I crooned until my throat filled up with fire. In the bathroom, in a beige stall where someone inked punk rock above the metal can, I met fluffy clouds. I discovered a hot house of opportunity, what grew when I was played often. I fingered out puffy candida curds, a confirmation of abundance and surprise. For I had built a garden and gone into business with a generous season. I would burn down, replaced with a sarcophagus of materials for making bread. In the tinny bathroom stall, disharmony became necessary work. I got to be a torch. Later, I was back with Giovanni, who was supposed to be a good poet. I turned pages. If I was enough, I'd be loved like cotton candy on a rainy day. And it was just like that, cotton and wet. At the doctor's behest, I thumbed a pamphlet describing yeast, sugar, and sex. I think I'll just read 2 more poems, and then that should leave us plenty of time for questions and make sure we've got everything that we need. I think that's good. I think this has been a good first time for me on Zoom. Hopefully. To home. The 3rd mile, and by then the mountain flattens in the river's green trench. Look west. Horses corralled beside banking shadows slouch in the heat. Deep breath flares in a muzzle marbled by dust. Velvet wrinkles as she takes the grass, a single water bead running from her nasal cup. She crushes the grass into its last rain, quieting as a cloud's brief journey cools. Her eyelids lower, she wakes again, pawing the earth. Give her handfuls from the ditch along the road. Breath rattles through her belly, sleeping while eating, habitual. The jaw's slow evolutions work in her eyes. Sweat starts inside your elbow where her head rests. You slip back into forms recognized, shapes you can take up again. Thick through the flank, rough coat shivering about a horsefly. Everywhere else is gone. And this is Friday morning, Niagara Falls. Along the curved railing, 5 languages converge in tolerances for wetness. A red umbrella sucked out of a fist disappears over the precipice. Everything converges. A guide stops his group to tell about Canadian geese raised upriver. Goslings learning to swim get caught in the current and often can be seen leaping at the fall, their unformed wings blunt propellers at the edge. You leap at the precipice, no other way to enter a convergence, which cascades, plummets, slams into rocks 60,000 gallons of water. Bunny ears and peace signs held above heads in photos. Sometimes you live through convergence, split and split again, torn, membrane thickening until your mother knew you were coming. That tremble made her nauseous. Your dreams kicked along her belly. Her bones moved open. You tore her again. She cried as you were laid between her breasts. Agate marbled in mucus and blood, blew into pinking. She smiled and laughed. Love all at once, a convergence. Over the river, cottonwoods stretch their shadows, all the roaring and tearing sucked back into crowns at sundown, a story dismantling their grip on earth. When the water increases and shores go, trees who spent hundreds of years beside raging force will know how to enter the fall. This morning, even I let my shadow enter the river, remembering the way we are all going. And though it is terrible at first, we must eventually converge with everything. Okay. So that's some of the work, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. I hope you have some for me. And I do realize that negative capability is probably very intuitive for most writers, and I think that's so incredible. But for me, I did need that permission to write from a place of, you know, not knowing. That was important for me. So. All right.
She's ready.
Thanks for the, I see your hands going, yay. I can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Amber, what I was saying is there were quite a few questions, so I will be looking at those and reaching out. And we can also let people, if they want to talk with her, we can let them have a chance to say something. So if you have a question,
They can unmute their
you can
video.
unmute.
Okay. And then I see these, I see all the chats. So would you like me just to kind of go through?
Yeah, if you would be willing to go through the chats, that'd be perfect, because there was quite a few had questions specifically.
Okay.
So head towards the end part.
Yeah, I see that. A lot of them are like, what? My mic's not working. Okay, so let me just get this.
I don't know what's going on.
Yes, Joan asked, do you begin with the ear? And I begin either with the ear, that's become very intuitive for me, or I begin with image. Those are the two things that drive my beginning place.
Thank you.
Okay. Some are just compliments, so I thank all of you for your compliments on some of those. Okay, what is my editing process? That's a really good question. I'm actually in the process of doing a piece for a journal called Underbelly, which asked me to talk a little bit about that. I do have a piece, well, I guess it doesn't really tell you much about editing. It tells you about the process of inspiration and creation. My process is very intensive. I always write everything by hand first. And what I'll often do is I write it in prose. I only allow line breaks when I know for sure that it's imperative that a line break be there, but I worry less about what it looks like on the page, and I worry more about just writing whatever needs to be written. So I write a lot and I cut a lot. So I might write 3 pages, and through the 3 pages, I might end up with only half a page of what I wrote initially. And that half a page will actually kind of work kind of like scaffolding for the process, for the whole poem. And I'll start to like fill in and figure out like the structure of it based on that. And sometimes I go back and I can pull images or words from that initial draft, but very often it's like I have to sort of write a lot to get the scaffolding for the piece. So on Blackberries, I would say that I probably did about 10 drafts, which is actually not as intensive as I've been on some of the poems. That one, because I was so focused on engaging with the idea of writing a poem about blackberries, I was thinking of Sylvia Plath's Blackberry series. She has a few poems on blackberries. I was thinking of Yusef Kamanyaka's Blackberry poems. So those, I was already engaging in a wider way, you know, about, and I just realized I probably need to introduce the question before I start answering it. But basically, I do. That one was easier for me because there were so many different poets that I was conversing with through that work. So let me go back here. Okay. Bill says, teach us how you believe in convergence, love, when the earth and society seem to be diverging, dissipating, dissolving into terrible entropy and separation and hate. All I can tell you is that I do believe in love, and I do believe that we are in a really horrible time right now, but I don't believe, so teach us. I love that you say teach us. as though I could. When I struggle every day to not dissolve into despair myself. I'm sure that a lot of us are trying, those of us who already are tender-hearted, and those pretty much all of us poets were pretty tender-hearted, we are really sensitive to the darkness, and there's a lot of darkness right now. And what I would say that I do is I have to learn to protect myself, my energy, my physical space. And so I can't be around the darkness for a long time. But when I am, what I try to do is I try to find some place within inside me where I can hold a light. And I don't know what to say about what's happening in the world, except that I think we have to continue to point it out and show it no matter how difficult it is. So what I mean by that is we can't become silent just because the noise of false truth is overwhelming to us right now, and also despair. And I would say that all that darkness, is the root of it is despair, which I think for me is the right word. That we turn towards despair, we turn towards darkness and hopelessness, and then also once we open the door to that, we open the door to evil in a sense, and evil only in the sense of not necessarily biblical evil, but yes, that is a part of it. But evil as in doing things that we know we shouldn't do, or harming others, I guess, and harming the planet and that kind of thing. Okay, I'm gonna get off that high horse and answer another question here.
I'm unmuting real quick because there are some more questions.
Mm-hmm. I see Sam says, I'm reading a lot of cop-outs, and they talk about our need to redefine nature as something that is not something apart from us, moving toward understanding that we have to begin to understand we are part of nature. Any thoughts? And I would say that yes, I think that what I want to do is I want to show that collision, and I'm working on poems like that are showing the collision between nature and human nature, and sort of considering what just kind of pointing to it so that we can start to understand that things that are human are also part of nature, and that we're driven quite a bit by natural processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm going to keep, because I see, let's see. I love that. Robert says, a lot of these sound like poems that come to you, that occurred to you when you were walking your dog. But seriously, do the beginning of poems come to you in the moment or later? And I would say that they always come to me at the most inconvenient times, when I'm driving my car and when I'm walking my dog. And I can't tell you how many times a line has come to me while I'm walking my dog, and I'm repeating it to myself 30 times as I'm trying to get my dog home. And of course, this is the one walk where she wants to smell everything. And I'm like, I gotta get home to remember this line. And every now and then I make it home and I remember the line, but 9 times out of 10, I don't get home in time to remember whatever the line is. But if I can remember that first line, the whole poem kind of flows after it, like not necessarily hitting the page complete, but rather just it begins, you know, and it sort of, it's that line, that phrase, that whatever the organization of the thought is actually what compels the later, you know, work that comes. But yeah, walking the dog, inconvenient times. Sometimes some of the poems, they have two ways, just like that with the line, the way it sounds, or a word or an image in it. And then the other thing is sometimes I'll be thinking for a very long time about a topic that I want to write about. For example, I started writing a poem about this blue whale that washed up on Mendocino coast. I've been trying to write that poem for very long. I've been thinking about how to approach it because I'm creating, it's a more imagined engagement with being one of the people. And I'd only seen the images, and I'd heard the story about how they it washed up on the shore, and you know, they're very, very large, and it took weeks for all these volunteers to take the whale apart. So I've been working on it. I wrote some of the draft, and because it's more imaginative and I wasn't actually there and I was part of it, but I want to tell the story of what it's like to enter the body of the whale, and to be a part of its body in the decaying process. Again, I'm fascinated with death. And I'm imagining the relationship of what that would be like to stand inside its body in that way. It's taken me a little bit of time to write it, but I think I kind of have found the voice. But because it's such a large process for me, I have a number of poems because they're requiring a lot more research, that are actually like, I'm writing in a different way than before because I'm actually having to use research to get the writing done. Okay, so John, I'm sorry, I'm getting behind on questions. So John Stickney asked what poets influenced my work. Okay, so there are quite a few poets that influenced me. I'm almost like gonna see if you can see the bookshelf. Let me just glance behind me here just to remind myself. Oh my, there's so many. Okay, let me just sort of back up my thinking here. I'm very influenced by Jory Graham, Sylvia Plath. My teachers, Carl Phillips, Yusuf Kamanyaka. I'm just trying to remember. I've been reading a lot of newer poets, like first book poets. I'm just trying to stay on top of who's publishing and what people are getting done out there in the world, kind of what's happening. So I've been reading like Natasha Trethewey and some other Cave Canem poets. I'm just trying to remember here. I've been rereading a lot of poets, going back to like Charles Wright is one of my favorite poets. I like a more sort of modern lyric poet. So I'll come back to that if someone else occurs to me, but I pretty much read everyone. Who was I just reading? I was just reading Ruth Stone again. Really absolutely love her work. Okay, so it says, Christina is asking, do I prefer to start softly for the reader and then end with lingering profound thought to continue to open up the different conclusions of a truth, as you mentioned in the discussion, for additional poems to spin off of the original thought? You often start softly for the reader. Those endings, like some poets are like that, they have that sort of powerful, resounding ending to their poems. And I'm one of those poets where I just sort of, my poems just end up in that kind of like reverberation, I guess. They don't all have to do that. And I don't necessarily only like poems that do that, but I don't make it an effort to end in that way. But I guess that because if you think of the poem as a kind of argumentative structure, if you start with a question, typically the beginning of the poem is going to be more, it's going to be softer, right? Because there's less certainty there. But if you fully investigate your question, then ultimately you do come to a place of understanding. So then towards the end of the poem, it's going to be harder or more deliberate, because there's going to be more authority or more certainty after investigation, right? So that might be kind of what you're asking is, you know, if you start with question, whether you pose the question or you pose the concern, and then you investigate it through the argument of the poem, then ultimately the truth does emerge, or a truth does emerge, and also more authority or more certainty does in the tone, if that kind of is what you mean there. Okay, should have said eco-poets. Okay, not, okay, all right. Oh God. All right, I'm gonna let that go. Something, collision or collusion, that's a good question. Huh, interesting, not sure what you mean there. So Kelly Jones asked, when do you walk away, or in other words, when do you know a poem is finished? I think that I'm just gonna follow what a lot of the good poets say, which is that a poem is never finished, it's just abandoned. And that's really all I can say, is that I never finish. Sometimes it's so hard to publish a book because I come to the book afterwards and I can see how I could have done more and done better. And it's like torture not to be able to go back. So hopefully before I die, someone will ask me to publish a selected or a collected, and I'll have an opportunity to go back and change some lines and fix some line breaks and words and things like that. But I think that the only way that we know when a poem is finished is when we can accept it. In the moment that we're in that moment, we accept that, we see it, and we understand that if it gets published, we're not going to be embarrassed by it. So just think about it like that. Like, if it wouldn't embarrass you to publish it, you know, if you can pretty much guess that feeling in you, and your gut says, okay, if this got published and I looked at it 2 years down the line, would I be mortified that I published this? So while there's poems that I'd like to change in all of my books, they're not embarrassing to me. That's the thing. That's how I know. But I can do better. Like, I look at them sometimes and I think I can do better than this, or I understand because I've evolved a little bit more in my thinking about a particular story or topic. I understand how I could have done it differently. So, but that's a danger too, because as we evolve, we move into different sort of like spaces with the form and with structure. And because of that, we can it can be a problem to start messing with the earlier work, which is truly fine for what it was at that time. Okay, so lost poem, Billy Collins. I love what Karen said, that poems that come when you're driving the car, I call those my danger poems. That's great. I might steal that. Danger poems. Okay, I know we're running down on time here.
Looks like there is one more question about what role does the accidental play in your writing? It's down with John Stickney.
Okay, so, oops. Sorry, I had it. Okay, sorry, the thing just popped up, but let me go.
Yep.
Poem, the poet is not the maker, but someone able to detect the presence of poetry in the accidental. Charles Simic, Negative Capability and Its Children. Okay, I have to check that out. What role does the accidental play in your writing? I would say that it is almost like, if it's accidental that I go someplace, I go for a walk on the headlands in Fort Bragg, and I stumble on a visitor center that just was erected, and they're planning to, they've just got the ground laid out where they're going to put this huge blue whale skeleton. And I realized that, like, based on the size and the images in this whole book, that I want to write a poem about this because it's utterly fascinating to me. Maybe that's an accident, but I think a better way to think about accident is that the part of our job as poets is for looking for the places of collision, so that we take something from over here and pulling those together. That's where we get the uniqueness of our vision. It's the way in which we sort of like, we bring these two things that someone else might not see, the way that they're communicating or the way that they're engaging, but we do in our own minds and our own hearts. And that's kind of, is that an accident? I don't know. Or is that just what a vision is? It's in fact an accident. And so for me, I think of it as accidental. I think of it as like luck or something like that. But I don't enjoy a poem that isn't like that smart, that doesn't like, isn't able to like be pulling from multiple places. Those are the poems that I enjoy the most, when like the parallels are sort of, you know, like these intersections, I guess, between things that I wouldn't have thought of before. I feel like I'm not, you know, coming up with any good examples, but ultimately accident, I think, is key. Accident, but also being aware, like we have to be awake and open to it. So we have to know, okay, so like I need to be open for the possibility. And I think that gets right back to the writing off the subject, where Hugo's suggesting that there's this sort of accident, that like it's this unconscious thing that happens, that we just start writing and we go, and then all of a sudden, like something, we are open to whatever is coming to us. And by opening up to it, we are allowing those accidents to kind of happen. But also just the more you feel that you have a certainty of understanding of how something works, the less likely you are to let the accident of discovery kind of happen to you, or the mystery to sort of like come in and sort of find you. Thank you, everyone. This has been really wonderful. And I hope that you enjoy this day and all stay healthy and safe. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to listen to you. And I love the, you hear oftentimes the write what you know. And I love that you kind of said, right towards the mystery, or right towards what you don't know, because there's something very adventurous and beautiful about opening up, as opposed to writing just what I know.
Yeah.
I unmuted everybody so we can all thank her at once.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me know if you need anything else. I have to go now. Is that okay? Or
just one more thing. I want to if you could post like where we could get your books, because if you was a regular thing, we would be able to get your books. So if you could post where we could get your books, that would be very helpful. Because I know people would definitely want to pick some of them, more of them up. And so that's really, and so I just want to really just thank you for just coming out and sharing with us. I really needed this. Yes. It's like every program I put together, it's like, oh, I needed that, so, and the programs I was telling Malika, if you say, oh, the program's so great, you get great people, it always works. So I just really thank you for coming. I really don't take this lightly. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so my books are all on Amazon. The first book is out of print. That's a little more expensive, but the next two, you probably find discounted copies. So, go for it. And what time is Gabby's presentation starting today? Gabrielle?
Join us this afternoon. She wasn't able to. And I did want to say, I know you're taking time out of your schedule when you suddenly have to put so much online and so much is in flux. So that was very kind of you, but she was unable to do so. So we will be having Kevin Watson from Press in the afternoon.
Okay. Well, yeah, no, they've basically, I have hybrid courses. So my course is already built and I only have to spend maybe 5 or 6 hours changing my materials, but for people who don't hold their classes and like that, I feel really bad for them because it takes me weeks to build a class online. So
Good girl.
Anyway. All right.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so, you want me to- okay. We can do full screen. So just to let everybody know, if you want to start signing up open mic, that would be helpful via the chat. Okay, so as names come in, we will unmute you. Okay, so Christina is the first one. Get her. Let's do. Pause.